Welcome to Compelling Topics, the only channel dedicated to the perspective of leading researchers from the Italian independent scene. Let's turn your minds on. There are questions that have crossed the entire history of humanity without ever finding a definitive answer. Questions that seem to belong to mathematics, yet in reality touch something far deeper, the very nature of reality itself. Prime numbers, seemingly simple, conceal one of the greatest mysteries of the universe. They do not follow obvious patterns, they do not obey easily understandable laws, and yet they are everywhere, like an invisible fabric holding the world together. But what if they were not just numbers? What if they were instructions, fragments of information, fundamental archetypes through which the universe builds itself and takes form? In this journey, guided by the theories of Corrado Malanga, we will go beyond mathematics to explore a radical idea that prime numbers do not simply describe reality, but represent its deepest code. And perhaps, understanding this code means understanding something even more important: who we are, why we exist, and what role we play in the consciousness of the universe. Corrado Malanga argues that the subject of prime numbers represents one of the most challenging and fundamental issues in understanding reality. His goal is to bring this topic to a broader audience, because understanding generates awareness, and awareness is a measure of consciousness. Malanga approaches the meaning of prime numbers by emphasizing that we should not be afraid of their apparent complexity. He explains that nothing is inherently difficult or easy. Things are easy simply because we know how to do them, while they are difficult because we do not. However, once understood, difficult things become easy. He also criticizes the education system, from elementary school to university, arguing that it teaches less and less, and in an increasingly confused way, often because many professors lack true awareness of what they are teaching. In school, we are never really told what numbers actually are. The only definition given is that they are used to count, which appears extremely limited from a consciousness perspective. He makes a fundamental distinction. Mathematics is not a science, but a language, just like English, Esperanto, or ancient Greek. Like all languages, mathematics has limitations and is constantly evolving. Over time, the mathematical vocabulary we once had is no longer sufficient to describe reality from a modern perspective. According to Malanga, the central problem with prime numbers is that mathematics cannot fully explain how they are formed in the universe or why they occupy specific positions. The sequence of prime numbers presents irregular gaps. After 2 comes 3, then 5, 7, 11, 13, and so on, with distances that appear random. The crucial question is, does an algorithm exist that can describe these sequences? The current answer is no. So much so that a $1 million prize has been offered to anyone who can solve this mystery. Malanga recalls that Riemann, many years ago, created a mathematical function that mimics the distribution of prime numbers, proving that some form of order must exist. If there is order, then these numbers must be connected by some kind of algorithm, even if that algorithm has not yet been discovered. At this point, Malanga proposes a radical shift in perspective. He asks what prime numbers truly are, and even more fundamentally, what numbers themselves are. He notes that even zero presents enormous conceptual challenges. The ancient Babylonians, lacking a symbol for nothingness, simply left a blank space. The circular symbol for zero appeared much later, highlighting how complex it is to represent the concept of nothing. Malanga argues that the traditional teaching of numbers is fundamentally flawed. We are told that prime numbers are those divisible only by themselves and 1, but this is a superficial definition. His key insight is that the number 2 may actually contain an instruction. In terms of consciousness, awareness is defined as having access to instructions. Without instructions, there is no awareness. The number 2 carries a specific piece of information, the concept of duality. It embodies the fundamental idea of what it means to be 2, what it means not to be 1. If every prime number were an instruction, if each contained the DNA of a piece of information, then these scattered instructions across space-time must necessarily be related to one another. So far, this relationship has been sought mathematically, but Malanga proposes a different approach. The crucial difference is that a prime number is irreducible. There is nothing behind it, while everything built above it is constructed from prime numbers. If prime numbers are instructions linked to geometric symmetries, and if those symmetries are information, understood as form and action, action within form, then prime numbers contain the very structure of consciousness. Understanding prime numbers would therefore mean understanding who we are, why we exist, and how we have created this universe. Malanga then addresses the question of the entropy of prime numbers. He argues that all physical models attempting to describe their entropy are fundamentally flawed. The reason is simple. Entropy measures change from one moment to the next. If prime numbers are constants, if 3 has always been 3 and will always be 3, and the difference between 2 and 3 is fixed, then there is no variation. And without variation, what entropy can be measured? One cannot calculate the entropy of a constant. Unless, of course, prime numbers move through space-time. But this movement is not visible within our ordinary perception. Malanga explains with a simple example. If 2 points representing prime numbers lie on a line, one in front of the other, when one moves, we don't perceive any change because they remain aligned. But if we observe them from a 90-degree angle, we begin to see that they are actually moving apart. The key insight was to transform prime numbers into objects positioned in space-time, and then to increase the number of dimensions. Malanga explains that increasing dimensions is an incredibly powerful method. If you have many scattered points on a 2-dimensional surface, by transforming that surface into a 3-dimensional space, a hidden geometry may suddenly emerge. And if nothing appears in 3 dimensions, you move to 4. His discovery is that in 4 dimensions, prime numbers align perfectly and reveal a movement through time. This movement is invisible in 3 dimensions, but becomes evident in 4. As they move, these numbers take on a specific form that is progressively organizing itself. Prime numbers will be fully organized only when the universe itself is complete. At that point, all prime numbers in 4 dimensions will be evenly spaced, forming a constant density across a surface that represents the structure of the universe. Only then does it make sense to speak of the entropy of prime numbers. This provides a powerful insight. It explains why prime numbers are not yet perfectly aligned, because the universe itself is not yet finished. It still has time to unfold before reaching completion. Malanga concludes that prime numbers are a measure of time, but the measure of time is also a measure of our awareness. Awareness becomes infinite and merges with consciousness only at the end of time, when the universe is fully constructed. The reason is simple. We are the builders of the universe. We are here to learn, and learning requires time. The universe was not created in a single instant, or perhaps it was, because time does not exist, as physicist Alan Aspect demonstrated. showing that the universe is non-local, beyond space and time. Yet within our experience, we perceive time. Our brain creates it. There is a timeline, and along this timeline arises a question. Were prime numbers all born at once, or did they emerge sequentially? First 2, then 3, then the others? In this sense, a prime number contains temporal information that can be understood geometrically rather than mathematically. To visualize 4 dimensions, something we cannot fully perceive even in 3, Malanga uses a geometric trick, color. The time calculated through the system of prime numbers corresponds precisely to the time physicists estimate for the end of the universe, assuming that photons possess an extremely small mass. Within prime numbers lies not only the structure of the universe, physics, and mathematics, but above all, geometry. Geometry is the representation of how reality has been created. To master this knowledge means gaining awareness of ourselves. The journey through prime numbers is ultimately a journey into human consciousness. Malanga also affirms a deep connection between archetypes and prime numbers. An archetype is a primary idea, something beyond which nothing exists. It is an irreducible system, with no prior construction behind it, yet capable of generating everything that follows. Prime numbers are archetypes because they represent forms of something we do not fully understand, something we have simply chosen to label with numbers. We could have called them John, Joseph, or Francis. It would make no difference, because there is nothing behind them. The human brain, which neurophysiologist Carl Prebram described as a hologram reader, has developed a way to interpret these instructions, these archetypes. Malanga defines archetypes as linear Hermitian operators, entities that perform operations and alter reality. For example, 3 and 5, connected by the operator plus, become 8. In this process, both 3 and 5 are transformed through the operation. Operators, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, are therefore models for transforming archetypes and generating new structures. They are instructions for modifying the universe itself. Because the brain struggles with such abstractions, archetypes have been translated into more accessible forms: colors, musical frequencies, notes, movements of the body. Neurolinguistic programming, rooted in geometry, shows that by moving the body in certain ways, others can understand what you are thinking without words. Everything is geometry. The brain reads the external world through movement and reinterprets it in archetypal terms: positive and negative, near and far, high and low. These are the fundamental categories, and this is where duality becomes evident. Malanga explains that numbers have a dual meaning. First, they count objects. Then, they measure the distance between them. This distinction is far from trivial and should be taught in elementary school. When numbers represent quantities, sets of objects, they are universal. The information they carry is the same everywhere in the universe. But when numbers are used to measure length, weight, or energy, they lose this universality because units of measurement vary. To truly understand the meaning of numbers, we must see them as instructions. And instructions must be the same throughout the entire universe, because entropy is always the same everywhere. Entropy is the only non-dual measure of the universe. There is no such thing as anti-entropy in the common sense. An entropy with a negative sign is not anti-entropy. It is simply entropy on the other side of the mirror. The universe has a plane of symmetry that must be preserved, otherwise the laws of physics would not work. We live on one side, and something, or someone, exists on the other side of the mirror. Those on the other side carry a negative sign, while we carry a positive one. This also relates to the concept of negative energy, which Einstein chose to ignore, claiming that since he did not understand it, it did not exist. Malanga ironically notes that Einstein was awarded a Nobel Prize, while he himself would likely be criticized for saying the same thing. Malanga then explores the archetypal meaning of the smallest prime numbers. The number 2 contains the instruction of duality. We live in a seemingly dual, yet ultimately virtual universe, and there must be an instruction that defines what 2 truly means. The number 3 represents the instruction of the Trinity, found in many major religions, from the Hindu Trimurti to the Christian Trinity. The need for the number 3 emerges when observing motion. If a pendulum moves very quickly between two positions, we do not perceive it as moving. We perceive it as being everywhere at once. According to Shannon's theorem, to perceive motion correctly, the eye must operate at a frequency at least twice that of the movement. Otherwise, we do not see two distinct positions, but a blended resonance, a third state. The interval between observations must have a precise value. Otherwise, we do not perceive Shiva or Vishnu, but Brahman. We perceive the mind, not the spirit. The mind is the superposition of two quantum states. This entire dynamic is encoded within the number 3. The number 5 contains the pentagon, the geometric figure tied to the golden ratio, the number through which the universe itself is structured. And then there is 7, the 7 musical notes, the 7 colors of the rainbow, the 7 chakras, the 7 gates of heaven. Where does this recurring pattern come from? Malanga identifies a connection between these prime numbers through a simple formula, 3 times n plus 1. This formula represents the level of human awareness. For example, with 7, 3 times 7 equals 21, plus 1 equals 22, the tarot. 21 times 3 equals 63, plus 1 equals 64, the I Ching. Ancient cultures, even without a mathematical understanding of prime numbers, felt the need to describe the universe through specific numbers that carried meaning. It becomes clear that there are a number of ways, x ways, for an object to move through space-time, plus 1. That 1 represents the sum of all possible movements combined. The formula 3n plus 1 reveals what we have understood about the universe. Understanding is greatest when n is as small as possible. If n equals 1, 3 times 1 plus 1 equals 4. The 4 ways an object can move: translation, rotation, expansion, and contraction. The plus 1 represents stillness, because the sum of all these movements results, effectively, in an object at rest. If n equals 0, 3 times 0 plus 1 equals 1. 1 is the only thing that truly exists, the irreducible form. It is a geometric operator, the center of inversion, the mirror through which one can see oneself from the other side. This is the deeper meaning behind the myth. God created man in his own image. In the Sefer Yetzirah, an ancient Hebrew text, there is a printer, God, who, through 21 stamps, the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, creates the printed man. The 22nd letter, Aleph, is the instruction that contains all others, the sum of all movements. In the tarot, this is the Fool, the card that contains all possible instructions. When n equals 0, there is only one instruction that contains all others. In motion, this instruction is stillness, because to remain still is to move in all directions simultaneously. Within stillness, within doing nothing, lies the sum of all actions. This reveals that at the core of archetypes lies geometry, not mathematics. Mathematics comes later as a descriptive system, and it also reveals the fundamental meaning of duality. A particle can move forward or backward, but if it does both simultaneously, it remains still. Stillness and motion in all directions are the same. Where we perceive emptiness in the universe, there is in fact an immense presence of matter and antimatter annihilating each other. Duality is an illusion. It does not truly exist. There is only unity. We struggle to understand this because of the limitations of our minds, and because we are here to experience what it means to be two. But when we realize that duality is not real, that it was created only for experience, we begin to see the universe in a more fundamental way. And suddenly, everything becomes much simpler. As awareness increases, the value of n in the formula 3n plus 1 becomes smaller. The fractal structure of the universe always follows the same formula, but as n decreases, the formula becomes clearer, simpler. Nothing actually changes except our perception. The formula remains the same, but awareness transforms our understanding of complexity. What seems complicated today may appear incredibly simple tomorrow. Malanga concludes with a seemingly paradoxical answer to what will happen when we finally solve the mystery of prime numbers. Nothing. And that is the beauty of it. Because in the absence of change, everything changes. When you truly understand something, you feel it. It has happened to everyone. You struggle with a problem for years, and one day, suddenly, you understand. In that moment, something shifts inside you. A click. And yet, looking around, everything appears exactly the same. But it isn't. Something deep has changed, the map of reality itself. You know it will never be the same again. You can no longer be deceived in the same way. You no longer see the world as you once did. People sense that these ideas matter, but they are afraid of them. We fear what we do not know, but what we truly understand cannot frighten us. Fear does not really exist, only the fear of fear itself. And as awareness grows, fear fades away. But the moment you say, God does not exist, I'm God, something unsettling happens. Because before, responsibility belonged to something external. Now, it belongs entirely to you. And that is frightening. Malanga ends with a message of optimism grounded in physics. The second law of thermodynamics tells us that entropy always increases. We cannot go backward. We cannot return to unconsciousness. The evolution of consciousness is inevitable. And in the end, the real question is not whether we will discover the secret of prime numbers, but what will happen within us when we do. Because the answer may not be an equation, nor a revolutionary formula. It may be something far more subtle, a shift in perspective, a silent moment in which everything looks the same, and yet nothing is. See you in the next episode of Fringe Friday, here on Compelling Topics.